Let's have a look into the history of the Anglo-Portuguese alliance. One of the oldest diplomatic alliances in the world still enforces that between Portugal and England. Officially, it was ratified in 1373, but the relationship between the two countries goes further back. To understand it, we must look into the beginnings of Portugal. In the 12th century, part of the Iberian Peninsula was under Moorish rule, but who are the Moors? Firstly, we must understand that the exonym comes from Christian vocabulary. A Moor, according to 12th century Christians, would be any Muslim individual whose origins could be pointed to the Maghreb, Northwest Africa, Al-Andalus, the Iberian Peninsula, and some of the islands across the Mediterranean. In 1711, Islamic communities crossed from North Africa into the Iberian Peninsula. They mostly consisted of Muslim individuals from North Africa and the Arabian Peninsula. Not too many centuries before, North Africa and Southern Europe had been united under the Roman Empire. The Islamic presence in the Iberian Peninsula had a long-lasting impact. Politically, it pushed the former Visigothic kingdoms to the north of the territory into Asturias, where they strove to survive. As history is never stagnant and the wheel keeps on spinning, throughout the centuries that follow, the large caliphates begin to fragment into smaller kingdoms, known as Taifa kingdoms. The history of the Taifa kingdoms is extremely rich and vast, so let us not dwell upon it now. What is important for the context of this video is that the Christian kingdoms to the north began fighting to regain the territory. One of those kingdoms is Portugal, who gained partial independence in 1143 and was officially recognized as independent by the papacy in 1179. Portugal thus participates in the context of the Reconquista, which is in essence the Iberian Crusade. This is when the Anglo-Portuguese relations begin to take form. From the beginning of the Reconquista, the new Portuguese kingdom benefited from the participation of English crusaders who were on their way to the Holy Land. In fact, in 1147, English crusaders aided the first Portuguese king, Afonso Henriques, to conquest Santarém and Lisbon. The latter is now the Portuguese capital. The Reconquista continues. Around the 13th century, the Portuguese borders are more or less defined with the conquest of Algarve. King Dinis, a descendant of that first Afonso Henriques, signs the first treaty between Portugal and England. Dinis, himself a descendant of Henry II of England, established a trade deal which enabled Portuguese merchants to live and trade in England as long as they did so under English law. 1 century later, his great-grandson Fernando signed the Treaty of Mutual Military Support with John of Gaunt, son of Edward III, the Treaty of de Gild. The following year, Edward III of England and Fernando signed the Anglo-Portuguese Treaty, which is considered the foundational moment of the present alliance. At this point, England is beginning to be involved with Castile, Portugal's old enemy. In 1371, John of Gaunt married Constanza of Castile, daughter of the King of Castile, Pedro. King Pedro had died in 1369, and John of Gaunt decided to press his wife's claims to the Castilian throne, so a Portuguese ally was most convenient. However, John of Gaunt does not immediately turn to Castile. Throughout the decade of 1370, he is mostly involved with the Hundred-Year War, fighting campaigns in Brittany, whereas Fernando of Portugal was involved in wars with Castile. The last of these wars was fought between 1381 and 1382, and English soldiers did fight in Portugal alongside Edmund of Langley, Earl of Cambridge and future Duke of York. When Fernando of Portugal dies in 1383, Portugal enters a succession crisis, and it is in consequence of that crisis that the Anglo-Portuguese alliance is consolidated. In 1385, Portugal has a new king. João I of Portugal was the illegitimate son of King Pedro of Portugal, and thus Fernando's illegitimate half-brother. He contended for the throne against Fernando's only surviving legitimate child, Beatriz, who was at that point Queen of Castile, through her marriage with João I of Castile. There's a lot of similar names here. John of Gaunt saw all the convenience in aiding the new title claimant. In any luck, he might be able to establish himself as King of Castile. As a consequence of their many interests in common, João of Portugal and John of Gaunt signed a new treaty. On the 9th of May 1386, the Treaty of Windsor is agreed upon. The document, which is kept at the National Archives in Portugal, strengthened the diplomatic relationships between Portugal and England. João of Portugal was acknowledged by England as the rightful king of Portugal and received the assistance of English archers at the famous Battle of Aljubarrota, which ended with a Portuguese victory. To consolidate this treaty, João of Portugal married John of Gaunt's eldest daughter, Princess Philippa of Lancaster. The new queen had an important role in her kingdom, often performing a diplomatic role both within the Portuguese court and in external relations. John of Gaunt's campaigns were less successful. The Anglo-Portuguese armies may have succeeded in repelling the Castilian armies from Portuguese territory, but logistical problems led to insufficient results when they marched into actual Castilian territory. The allies were forced to return to Portugal. John of Gaunt eventually renounced to his rights and his wives to the Castilian throne. In exchange, their daughter Catalina was married to the heir to the Castilian throne, Enrique. John of Gaunt was never a king, but he was successful through his children. With Philippa as Queen of Portugal, Catalina as Queen of Castile, and Henry as a future Henry IV of England, he could at least boast of his descendants. The history of the Anglo-Portuguese alliance goes out through the centuries, but these are the foundational moments.